being here and willing to contribute your time. This type of a project is pretty labor intensive, and without all these volunteers, there's no way we'd be able to do this. And it's great to hear that all of you like birds, but you do not have to like birds necessarily to be part of this project. So any friends of yours who are bird haters, you can also bring them with you. That's a joke. So we want to just start off by giving you a bit of a background information and a little introduction as to why this project is important and kind of the magnitude of the problem we're talking about here. And that's what I guess the next 3 or 4 hours is going to be, just talking just about that introduction. So just to give you a sense about how big of an issue this is, that the blue line here is in Canada, the red line here is in the United States, and this is mortality estimate, log transformed in terms of millions or billions, and this is the source of mortality for birds along the way. So cats, and these are both feral and domestic cats that are let outdoors. Cats are a leading cause. There's obviously a lot of debate, especially if you're a cat owner or a cat lover. People will dispute how many birds and other types of wildlife cats are responsible for killing, but undoubtedly that's a big one. And then we get into buildings, windows, and then it kind of trickles down automobiles, power lines, wind turbines, things like that. So, and depending on the estimates you want to believe, the number of birds that are killed annually by buildings, and when we talk about buildings, we're really talking about the windows primarily, which we'll talk a little bit more in just a minute in depth, but anywhere from about 57 million to almost 957 million birds a year are killed by building structure, window structure. So that's quite a wide range, and is a broad estimate, obviously, but nonetheless, depending on what number you want to believe, that is a lot of birds being killed each single year. It is again just one source, and if we get into what's calling cumulative mortalities, you start adding all these mortality sources up, and it's pretty significant mortality across the continent. The good news, I guess, is we should say that most of these birds are during migration is when most of the collisions occur, and it's usually migratory birds, or the songbirds that are coming up from either southern United States, Central America, coming up here to nest in the springtime, or as they go south for the winter migration. So most of this occurs during migration period. And when we talk about buildings, we're not talking about a generic building, so a lot of times people think about these tall skyscrapers, and certainly those skyscrapers are responsible for collisions with birds. There's a lot of programs like Lights Out and things like that in Toronto and Chicago and other cities around North America, where they turn the lights out at night so that these birds aren't necessarily attracted, or they don't signal these buildings. But most of the collision comes from relatively small or short-story buildings, so buildings that are maybe 11 stories or less, and that's about, I don't know, a little bit more than half of the mortality, and then the other half, a little less than half, is residential buildings, so houses and things like that. So we're not talking about these big skyscrapers, we're talking about buildings that are here on campus and the residential communities that surround campus. Nonetheless, that's a lot of birds to be killed. The good news, I guess, if there is good news, is that if you look at a continent-wide population, depending on the species again, but most of these species that are found are not suffering from population decline, so they're actually doing pretty well, and they can sustain, and that is a lot of birds, but that's how much reproduction is going on each year as well, that they can sustain that kind of mortality. All right, and then this gives you a sense about kind of the migratory pathways here and where the bird clusters are, cities and things of that nature. But during migration, migration is a lot shorter in the springtime. It's about 6 weeks in the springtime because the birds are very anxious to get up here in their breeding grounds and start breeding. The migration during the fall is a lot longer, so it usually starts mid-August and goes into late October, mid-November, depending on the species you're talking about. And then obviously there's flyways. The United States is divided into flyways, but most of migration is north-south, and it follows either the mountain ridges or riverways like the Mississippi River, or the coastline like the Atlantic coast, and waters and things like that. But you can kind of this gives you a sense about where they go, and they are flying mostly at night during migration, and then they will usually lay down during the day, so they'll rest during the day, and they'll just land, rest, refuel, so they'll eat, kind of refuel their body for the next night's migration. Again, depending on species. So there are birds that just, they'll fly for 48 hours straight, but most of the songbirds will just fly at night, rest during the day, get up and fly at night again. And then as you can imagine, let me go back to this side really quick. So when we talk about the eastern half of the United States, we're a pretty populated country right now. About 325 million people live in the United States, and so there's a lot of building to support all those humans. And in the eastern half of the United States, we've got concentrated buildings and infrastructure and things like that, especially as you get up toward the East Coast and up in the Northeast corridor and things like that. So there's a lot of things that these birds have to migrate past, navigate, and things like that. And there's a lot of windows that they're looking at. And so the windows are an issue for a whole bunch of reasons. Number one, it's a solid surface for them to run into. Some birds will just stun themselves and may lay down for a little bit and get back up and get going. But a lot of birds obviously are running into these windows and breaking their necks or breaking their heads or skull, and blunt force trauma is what's killing them. And what attracts them to the window, there's a number of things, but as you can see here, this is on the outside of a building looking, you can see the reflection of that habitat, and so they get attracted. They think that they're flying into a tree here, and actually they see the reflection of the tree in that window, and that's what is causing them in this regard to hit that window. Other times, they might be able to see what's inside the building. So again, we're on the outside of the building looking in, and there's a little garden area in here, and so that's what they are attracted to, is that vegetation, and they see that and will fly in to the window that way. And then we get these what's called pass-through effects, and this is obviously a skyway or a walkway between buildings, but you can have that in houses. If the front of the house has a great big plate glass window, and that plate glass window lines up with a plate glass window in the back of the house, it looks like a hallway that these birds can just fly right through. And so anything like that also can create problems for birds. And then we get into situations like this, where a bird might get into kind of a canyon and it can't find its way out, and it just keeps flying around and around and around. And as you can see, there's a lot of glass here, some pass-through effects right here, but there's a lot of stuff for these birds to hit. And again, they're doing this at night, so most birds, as they migrate migrate by sight, and that's what they're following is the landscape and kind of the map of what they see on the earth. So at night, you can imagine, some of these windows might have lights in them because the lights are from TVs or the indoor light or whatever the case is, and it's very disorienting for these birds to try to find their way out of that kind of a U-shaped alley. And then there's a lot of science behind lighting effects and birds. On communication towers and wind turbines and things like that, if you ever look at those communication towers, during the day the light is white and it's either steady or flashing. At nighttime, that light goes from white to red, and it goes to red so that airplane pilots and other people that are up in the sky, it doesn't ruin their night vision so much. But those birds are attracted to that light, either a blinking light or a steady state light, depending on the structure. And so what happens, especially with these buildings, is a lot of times these birds can fly above the building during migration, or they can fly above these tall communication towers, like the NBC 15 tower off the Beltline there, for example. If it's a clear sky, they can fly, usually they fly well above those towers. But if a weather system comes in and it pushes that ceiling down, then the birds, because they want to migrate by sight, they get down below those clouds, and that's when we get into problems with them colliding with towers and buildings and things like that. And then when you get into a situation where there's light and there's fog or clouds, that light kind of diffuses through that cloud, and it gets very disorienting for the birds, and that light becomes almost a beacon. And those birds will start flying around that light. And if it's on the top of a communication tower, for example, they'll just keep circling and circling and circling until they exhaust themselves, or they might hit the guy wires that are holding that communication tower up. But the same type of thing with buildings is they see all these lights in the buildings and they're attracted to it for some reason, and it's disorienting to them. And eventually they'll either just fly around and around and around until they hit the window or they exhaust themselves. All right, so do you want me to quickly cover a little bit of the project beginnings?
Sure. Yeah, I think you and Aaron could cover it.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to turn to you, Aaron, because you were more involved in that panel discussion than I would. So if you want to take it from there.
I know. Talk about learning.
I'm not a good presenter, so we'll try this.
Can I
So,
ask a question?
yes.
I'm the one that wanted to get right to it, but now I have a question. What goes on in academia between, say, people like you and wildlife ecologists and ornithologists and schools of architecture to just kind of build this in from the very get-go? When you design a building, you think of wildlife, and
Yeah.
what efforts are underway with that?
Could you repeat the question for the?
Yeah, so the question is, what kind of interaction or synergy is there going on between wildlife ecologists or ornithologists and architects in order to try to design more wildlife-friendly buildings? And I'm guessing specifically you're talking about trying to reduce the amount of bird collisions with buildings.
Right.
But there's other, obviously, we can expand beyond
Right.
that. There's other issues with, bats or raccoons or whatever species you want to talk about. Not a ton, unfortunately. And it's unfortunate that's the case, but some architectural firms are trying to start to think about this idea. It's not a widespread philosophy going on or practice to try to design wildlife-friendly buildings. But PP&G, Pittsburgh Paint and Glass, they've actually done a lot of work with ornithologists and the Cornell Lab of Ornithology, for example, and things like that, where they're trying to design bird-friendly glass to go into buildings. And so one of the things that they're trying to design, and have designed, is glass that will cut down on that reflection, so the bird can't see the habitat reflected in the glass, for example. Or they'll put some kind of a frittering in the glass, the bird can actually see the glass. So in a pass-through situation, the bird knows that there's some kind of a barrier there and can try to avoid it. So Pittsburgh Paint and Glass is trying to do a lot with bird-friendly or bird-safe glass to put into buildings. As I understand it, that glass is a little bit more expensive than just plain, clear pane glass. So sometimes the cost is an issue with that. But to get to your point about architecture, if you look at the U.S. Bank Stadium where the Minnesota Vikings play, there's that whole stadium is just one big bird killing stadium, and
It's another reason I hate the Vikings.
whoa. And I know that the Audubon Society in Minneapolis and Minnesota, and others protested that design, and nothing really changed from that. So,
And
But
they're
I
doing
would
a
like to
similar-
see academia, chairs of this department or whatever.
nobody listens to us. Plus, we're on our ivory tower. I mean, so and most of what we do gets lost in journals, unfortunately. But I would agree with you. There's a lot more that could be done. There's no doubt.
And that's really what this project is geared toward, is to work with people like Aaron and other architects on campus and in town and beyond that can make a difference in those decisions. Aaron, do you want to elaborate on what David said?
So, excellent. So I'm a landscape architect. I'm not a bird hater, but I know nothing about birds. So, but after this project, I now know a scarlet tanager is probably my favorite bird. And I know we're working with purple martins in the preserve. So, I know I'm starting to pick up on some bird stuff. But yeah, so how this actually all got started, I'll touch on the architecture thing because we don't have an architecture program here on campus.
Oh.
So consider FP&M, myself, as trying to be that conduit of actually getting boots on the ground and doing something. But it got started from the neighborhood association, which I don't know if anyone attends our building. So FP&M we present all of our projects to our neighbors. We have 4 different groups around campus that we have to please and take their input. And we're at a meeting for the surf building, which is under construction now in Dayton. And one of the neighbors, I don't know from what Capital Neighborhood Association, was like, well, what'd you guys do to prevent bird strikes on your building? And the architect glances over at me like, what did you do, dumbass? And I'm like, oh, you're the architect. What did you do? Yeah, I'm the client. Like, you're designing the thing. I don't know. So at that point, I'm like, well, this is okay. And it comes up at every meeting now. What are you doing about bird architecture? Which I think is great because we prep all of our architects now. We give them this book, which is from the American Bird Conservancy. Christine Shepard is doing really good work on stuff. And this has some of the stuff that David was talking about and some mitigation techniques. But we're starting to work that into the protocol of all our new buildings. So that's coming from the campus planning and landscape architecture wing of the campus. So we have a capital planning and development where the architects are, but they're primarily project managers. And they can kind of raise the message up, but I think from a campus planning standpoint, it's easier for us to kind of take that message to them. So after the architect didn't know what he was doing, I worked, I think I maybe reached out to Matt first in the Autobahn. Happens to be my neighbor, I had no idea. And we started talking. We got Anna Pigeon involved. She's actually been looking at this stuff. And then she brought in Stanley Temple, who was like, well, I'm like, oh my God, this is becoming like an amazing sort of group of people. So we hooked up a symposium, I think it was in September of 2016 or something. And I think we had about 60 people that attended that meeting. And it was a panel discussion led by Stanley, and it was Anna Pigeon, Matt Reitz, an architect from New York, Ennead Architects, E-N-N-E-A-D, they're probably the leading architects in the country on bird architecture, bird-friendly architecture. I'm trying to think who the fourth person was. There's 4 people.
I don't recall either.
I don't remember. But anyways, so we had primarily, there's a lot of architects in the crowd, some bird people, bird organizations. So it started to get the wheels turning, and out of that came this whole spring migration, and Autobahn has been critical in kind of getting this sort of monitoring thing going. So it's been very helpful. But yeah, my intention from a campus planning standpoint is we know it's a problem, but we don't necessarily know where it's happening. What can we do about that problem? So there's the new building side of things, and there's a renovation side of things. Renovation seems to be more maybe low-hanging fruit. You know, this building might be a good example. It's got some pass-throughs. What can we do right there and that sort of thing. So it's getting the discussion going and getting some data behind it that, yeah, I mean, is killing, 100 birds during a migration on 10 buildings, is that a big deal? I don't know. I mean, if we're knowingly building things and we're killing something, I think that's kind of a bad thing. I don't think we should knowingly do it. So, and also through this, the Messenger, if anyone's seen the movie The Messenger, and they present the idea that, I mean, we know birds can live without us, but can we live without them? And that kind of like struck me as like, probably not. Like, it seems to be a hell of a lot more mosquitoes. I mean, I wish there were more birds, but don't birds eat mosquitoes? I know nothing about birds.
They do.
Yeah, they eat more birds.
He needs help.
So anyway, so that's how this all got going. That's kind of the background. I probably missed a bunch of stuff. But yeah, I don't know if that answers any of your question, but I will say University of Milwaukee is doing this stuff. They're not doing the migratory monitoring that I know about, but they're actually, their architecture program has a pass-through stairwell, and they're monitoring. They have a proposal to put sensors on all the different glass panels to figure out where birds are hitting on this thing. So they're looking into it probably more than we are at this point, but we hope that this sort of information will propel us.
Other questions so far? Okay, great. Do you have anything you want
I'm
to
just
add?
going to add, so I think basically, taking off what Aaron was saying, and just what we're hoping to accomplish here is just to collect data, because without the data, we don't know if this is an issue, how big of an issue it is, which buildings you might want to try to retrofit or make some kind of a mitigation effort on. So that's what this whole idea is about, is to try to collect birds. We want to find out how many birds, what species, what buildings. Is it always the same side of the building, or is it all the way around the building? And all of that. And the more data we can collect, then the better decisions we can make if we do decide to make some kind of a action plan or retrofit buildings. So that's what this is all about. All right.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Thank you. So as I said, we started this project in the spring and had the same buildings and same arrangement for the spring. So this fall period will be another way to look at this and see if there are differences between spring and fall migration, and in which buildings are particularly problematic and which species are most impacted by buildings and windows. So what we found in the spring was that there were certain buildings that were hotspots, and I'm not going to tell you what those were so that it doesn't bias your work, but it wouldn't be too hard to find out if you're super curious because of iNaturalist. So we also found that almost all of the birds that were injured or killed from window strikes were migratory. And do you want to talk about the difference between migratory birds and resident birds and their attraction to windows or ability to?
Yeah, we could, well, so obviously, the resident birds are the ones that are staying here year-round. And about 85% of the bird species, of which we have roughly 400 in the state of Wisconsin, about 85% of those bird species migrate and leave our state during the wintertime. How far south they go depends on the species, but obviously as they migrate, they are not as well, or they're not as familiar with that local area. So a resident bird, like a cardinal, they're not traveling, tens of miles or hundreds of miles or thousands of miles, and so they have a very good idea, and they're very familiar with that immediate area where they go to find food and rest and all that kind of stuff. And that's the issue with migratory birds, is they're traveling across great distances of unfamiliar habitat that they don't know about. And they're traveling at night, and they're traveling in inclement weather and things like that. And they have to go because they're not equipped to stay up here in the wintertime, so they have no choice. If the weather's not good, or if they don't feel like flying that day, they better still do it, because they've got to get the heck out of Dodge and get down south, or they got to get up north to nest. The resident birds, they have great familiarity with their area, their home range, where they are, and if the weather's inclement or they just don't feel like flying, they don't have to that day, or they don't have to for part of that day. So that's the biggest difference.
Thanks. So the volunteers from the spring survey collected 76 dead birds from this project, and of those 76, there were 29 species represented. A lot of them were warblers. So it'll be very interesting to see what you find in these surveys, if it's a similar trend or a different trend. So the general protocol, if you look into your kit here, there is a sheet in there, a laminated sheet that's called the protocol cheat sheet. Looks like this. And that gives you the basic plan for what you'll be doing as you visit your buildings. So each of you have signed up for a sector. Each sector contains at least 2 buildings, and some of them up to 3. I think 3 is the most. And I'm sorry I left this stack of papers on my desk today and didn't bring them, but I'll email you later tonight each of your sectors and what tips we have for you on how to survey them. Because there are a couple, like if you're on the Cole Center, you can't access a whole side of it because it's closed off for loading dock stuff. So it'll be information like that.
You don't get tickets to a game.
I know. So it'll be information like that that'll be useful for you to know as you go out to survey. So again, I'm sorry I don't have that, but in general, the idea is that you'll choose a starting point. Say for the Cole Center here, maybe you'll start on the south side. You'll walk about 6 feet from the building, if you're able to, and you'll survey from the base of the building out to where you are and another 6 feet. So you'll just sort of watch the ground. If there are shrubbery or shrubs in the area, you'll, as much as you can, pick through the shrubs, lift up branches, kick through piles of leaves to see if there's anything hidden or that's tumbled into the landscaping. All of the people who would know or need to know that you're doing this, building managers, campus police, anyone like that knows that you're going to be out. So that includes the landscaping crews, so don't feel like you're going to devastate the landscaping and that someone will come after you with a rake, like as you go through the landscaping. So you'll walk 6 feet out, look for in a band of 12 feet. If you find a stunned bird, Jackie will talk about this a little more in a little bit, but if you find a stunned bird, we have a paper bag here that you can put the bird into, or you can use a different type of receptacle. Some people in the spring brought like a 5-gallon pail along, which was a nice size and allowed for the bird to be able to fly up and out. If it was, over its stunned injury, But that's what we have these paper bags in here for, so that you can put the stun bird in here, leave it in the shade, watch it for about 20 minutes or so, and then check on it, see if it's able to fly again. If you find an injured bird, one that is clearly injured, again, Jackie will talk about signs for that, but if it's clearly injured, you can put it into this fabric bag, specially made for this project. So you can pick up the bird, place it into the bag. You'll want to make sure that you pull this shut and then use the string to wrap it around the top a couple of times and tuck the string in so that it doesn't come loose and the bird doesn't try to fly out the opening. Then you'll be able to take this out to the wildlife center, the rehab center, or you can call the animal services. Thank you, animal services. I have a phone number to give you for them. If you find a dead bird, you will use this box of plastic bags to put the bird into. We also have plastic gloves if it's not your thing to pick up dead things. So you can put on gloves, or you can even use this bag to pick up the bird and then turn the bag inside out. Each dead bird needs to come with a slip that gives details about where you found it. We use the specimens and the slips to cross-check everything that's in the iNaturalist database to make sure that identifications are correct and be able to follow up with you if we have any questions about what you found. On the back of your, as you are finding birds, regardless of if it's injured, stunned, or dead, we're asking that everyone document it using the iNaturalist app. So it doesn't matter what state the bird is in, we want to make sure that we collect information about this bird. So you'll use iNaturalist to take a photo. Actually, we'd love 2 photos for each observation. We'd love a picture of the bird, and then if you can take 10 steps back, take a picture of the bird and the location that you found it, so we have an idea of what it looked like if there was this giant pane of glass or box cannon or whatever it is. So 2 pictures per observation if possible. If it's a stunned bird and it flushes as you approach it to take a picture, that's understandable, and we can try different methods to avoid flushing the bird, but, and Jackie will talk about that again. But if at all possible, a couple pictures. Then there will be the rest of the form in iNaturalist to fill out as well that has all the details to go with it.
I've got a question.
Yeah.
On the protocol cheat sheet, it says that they can be delivered for the injured bird or the dead bird. That lists a few different places to deliver them, including one being here in Russell Labs, which is convenient and close for me based off of where I am. And
Sure.
Where would we take those?
So if you have a dead bird, if it's an injured bird, it would be great if you could either deliver it to the rehab center or call animal services. The phone number for animal services
Hey, look at that. Thank you.
is it on the back of it?
It is all on the back, yeah.
That's the rehab center. Do you know though, I think it's 255
2345.
2345, great.
Animal services only operates 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. though, so is that then your correct, like your hours for the volunteers, do you know?
Well, the first shift would be from 5 to 8 a.m.
5 to 8 a.m. Yeah, so if they had an injured bird, I mean, it would be great if they could bring it to us if possible. Worst case scenario, you can keep it with you until they start pickups at 9 a.m. And if you're willing to do that, that would be great. Or you can call us and we can see what type of options we may have if we have a volunteer available that could to get it. But
Great.
it's hard for us to do that just on last minute notice.
So Jackie from the rehab center, just for the benefit of the recording and those in front who can hear, but Jackie from the rehab center said that animal services doesn't start working until 9 a.m. So if you have an injured bird, if you're in that first shift and you have an injured bird, it would be best if you could keep it with you until you could get out to the rehab center, which opens at 8, or call animal services that starts at 9.
And where is the rehab?
The rehab center is south of the Beltline, off of Stoughton Road.
Where the Humane Society is?
Yes,
It's
yes.
the same, we're just
Sorry.
a separate program,
Okay.
but yeah, we're right there on the same property.
Right.
If you have a dead bird, you can either drop it off here at Russell. There are a few different buildings that are listed here. Or you can bring it to Madison Audubon Society on the east side, near east side. We're on the Isthmus.
And Brenda, I just got an email about the refrigerator.
Great, so if you have a dead bird that you don't want to keep in your freezer and want to deliver it, but maybe the building isn't open yet or no staff members are here yet, we've arranged to have a refrigerator outside of this building, and we'll be able, you can put it into that refrigerator until someone comes in and can pick it up. So you
So,
wanna,
yeah, so here's what our building maintenance guy said. The refrigerator is going to be between Russell Lab and Steenbach Library. So it's going to be on the north side of the building, okay? And it's going to be in the back corner of the towers on the Babcock Street side. So it's going to be on the, I guess that'd be the northeast side of the building is of Russell, okay? So Babcock is that street that runs between Observatory Drive on the backside and Linden Drive, right there. Oh yeah, of course, yeah, that'd be easier. Yeah, so this is, let's see where we are. Here's the observatory. Yeah, so this should be Babcock right here. Okay, yeah, so this is us. Yeah, dang gum, you're smart. Okay, now, all right, this is us here. It should be right back here on this side of the building, okay? And what it says here is,
David, can you point one more time, please?
of course. It's going to be right here by building number, on the backside of building number 4. And it says it's in the screened-in area of the inside corner of the towers. Okay, so it'll be right back here. You know, the screen is pretty obvious. And right now they've got a black refrigeration trailer back there, so it's going to be behind the black refrigeration trailer. All right?
We'll send a photo of what this looks like
Yes.
and instructions on how to get there.
Yeah. But it is back there. We are probably going to try to provide a lock to the refrigerator, and we'll either tell you where the key is or we'll tell you the combination once we get that sorted out. But the lock probably won't be in place till sometime early next week.
Or put them in our refrigerator at home.
Yes,
and
you
then
can also
bring
do
them to these
Yeah.
places.
Yep, and you don't have to bring them every single day. You can bring them once a week or once every 2 weeks or whatever you want to do.
It would be great if you didn't stash them for the whole 6 weeks.
No.
You probably don't want birds in your refrigerator for that long anyways, but if it's a short while, it can be the refrigerator. If it's gonna be a couple of days, the freezer is better. Okay, so any questions about the protocol? Okay.
Yeah, one quick, you
Yeah,
said
yeah.
it can also go to the 1400 East Washington, Madison Audubon as well.
Yes.
What are the hours there?
So we're typically there, someone is reliably there at 9 until 4. Often there's someone there before or after that, but it just depends on if anyone's teaching or in meetings. We're a pretty small staff.
Okay,
Yep. We'll also have a cooler outside of our door.
okay.
So if you come before, I think our building opens at 7 or 7:30 and closes around the same time in the evening. So if you come before or after, or we're not there, we'll have a cooler outside the door so that you can put it in there as well.
And label it so that we know this is.
Yep, it'll have a label on it, yep, definitely.
For those of us that are in the first shift, the 5 to 8 a.m. shift, in terms of the finding injured birds and contacting for a pickup, you said that starts around 9.
Yep, so animal services, it's a group of paid officers that
Yeah.
go around the county. There's 2 of them every day, one that's downtown and one that's in the outskirts of the
Okay.
county. And just by county contracts, they bring any sick or injured wildlife to our facility.
Okay.
They're really wonderful people. And so they're not like a volunteer with our program or anything, it's
Right.
just county paid. So they're reliably available 9 to 5.
Cool, and are they pretty prompt? I guess I asked because 9:30 I have somewhere to be, and so that's a pretty short window there for me in terms of getting the injured bird to somebody who can.
I can't 100% say that they'll be prompt, it depends on the
Right.
day and
Yeah.
what different calls they have, because they'll be responding to, a loose dog and highway type of calls or domestic
Yeah.
disputes with animals, so it's not always wildlife, but if you call that dispatch number, you can also describe the situation, and if you left the bird in a safe place, like in a shady area, in
Okay.
a very specific spot, and say, hey, I've left a bird here, they may be able to pick it up, and they may
Okay.
agree to that. You just kind of have to ask the dispatch officer if that's something they'd be willing to do.
Yeah.
Kind of depends on who's on staff that day.
Okay.
But worst case scenario, you can always call our phone number too, if you're unsure.
Yeah.
Do we have that number?
It
So-
should be on your.
Yeah, I'm sorry, for some reason, some of them printed out with this phone number and others didn't. So the phone number for animal services is 255-2345.
And you'll get an automatic voicemail prompt if you call that number. It's best if you can just say animal services right to the prompt.
Sure. So Jackie just said, for the recording,
Sorry.
Jackie just said, when you call, you'll get an automated response, and you'll say animal services to get you to the right spot. Okay. So in terms of your shift times, the first shift runs between 5 and 8 a.m. and the second is from 9 to 11 a.m. You don't have to be at your sector at 5 a.m. or 9 a.m. It'll take you about an hour probably to survey all of the buildings in your sector, and you can do that anytime within that time frame. So whatever works best for your schedule or the bus schedule or whatever, as long as it's within that time frame that you signed up for, that's fine.
Do we know, this is a random question, but do we know if our urban candidate population is taking birds? Do we suspect that now?
I'm sure they are.
You think so? That's partly why it's so damn early in the morning, right?
Yeah, exactly. So, right, that's the idea, to have
Yeah, so
people
well,
pick up birds before
yeah, before,
scavengers do.
well, so it's that, and just before anybody else might get out there. But if to be truly scientific about this, if we wanted to truly generate an estimate as to how many birds are getting killed by these windows, we would do, in addition to going and picking up the birds, we would do a searcher efficiency trial. So we would put out birds that you would not be aware of, but we'd know where they are, which birds they were, and how many, and things like that. And we'd actually test you to see how good you are at finding birds. So that's one thing we'd have to evaluate as the searcher efficiency. And then the other thing is scavenger removal. So we put out other birds and we'd leave them for a 30 to 45 day period, and we'd go back periodically and see how many birds are remaining or how many birds are being removed by scavengers. We don't really care what scavenger takes them, we just need to have a rate of scavenger removal. And between searcher efficiency and scavenger removal, then we could develop a fatality estimate to figure out how many really truly how many birds are being killed.
So are the vast majority of the birds found in that early survey, and the next survey is just kind of pick up what was missed?
No, well, so most of the birds are found in that first survey, but
They
those
get all
birds
later
are
on then.
theoretically the ones that collided with windows overnight as they were flying. The birds that will be picked up between the 9 to 11, and there are a significant number that are picked up in that shift, are likely the ones that struck windows when they were foraging, when they were resting and feeding, and then tried to move into a shrub that was actually just a reflection of a shrub. Okay. Any other questions about, yes, Mary?
Now, if it takes an hour, you said, to do your sector, and it says here, you're being asked to dedicate about 3 to 4.5 hours per week. Do you,
Oh, I'm sorry, that's a holdover from the spring,
oh.
when we required that everyone sign up for 3 shifts.
Oh,
Yep, sorry.
so now do we sign up, can we sign up for just one?
Yep, you can sign up for just 1. We'd love it if you signed up for 3,
And-
or more than 1, however many you want. But yes, we just, 1 is all you have to sign up for.
Maybe I should wait till we get the assignments, but do we can we stagger it, like we do it one week on Monday and the next week on Wednesday, or do you want it like every Wednesday, every Monday?
If you signed up for Monday at a certain time, I can look for you. I don't recall.
Well, we can.
Yeah, I have the printout here of the schedule, but if you signed up for a Monday, it would be great if you could do it every Monday, because we're trying to get 7 days a week coverage for each of these buildings.
Right.
So that predictability helps with that. Okay. Okay, so if you have, I'm sorry, David?
Oh, I was just gonna mention quickly, that most days you're out, you're probably not gonna find a bird. You may find one or so here and there, but most of the days you're not gonna find birds. And so don't be discouraged and don't doubt your abilities. I mean, this isn't rocket science by any stretch of the imagination. But what's gonna happen is, obviously now the birds are flying south, and they've got a limited amount of fat reserves to get them from here down to where they're going. So if there is any wind coming out of the south, they're not gonna fly that day or that night because they're flying into a headwind and it's gonna burn too much energy. When you get, right now, weather patterns are where you get a wind coming out of the north or north sector, and you get fronts that come through where the ceiling, you get cloud cover or a storm coming through. That's the kind of situation that will set up where you get a bird kill for the next morning. Okay, so just don't take it lightly if it's clear skies the night before and light wind or something like that. Don't expect not to see something, but your likelihood is going to increase when there's northerly winds and there's a storm front coming through and that ceiling's dropped, because that's when the birds are going to most likely hit those buildings. Okay.
We do ask you to survey in all sorts of weather. If you feel extremely uncomfortable or there's a tornado warning or something, then you can skip that shift. But if it's raining or if it's snowing, we would still really appreciate it if you could still do a survey for us. So a couple other things that are in your kits. You'll see that there are a few gloves, latex gloves. There's also a set of these dead bird slips. There's some information about Madison Audubon and a sticker, if you like stickers. As well as one of these badges, or if you are working on a team, you may have more than one. But all of the people that might be glancing out their office window and see you, what they think might be sort of creepily moving around their building, will see that you are actually doing something legitimate. So if you could wear your bird research badge, I think that would probably make everybody feel more comfortable. Like I said, the campus police and everyone know that you're doing this, but it's just sort of an extra measure to make sure that we're being communicative and open. So there is also, along those lines, an official volunteer card. So if someone does stop you, you can show them that you are legit.
I think that bird research thing is excellent marketing too.
Yeah.
You get asked questions from a lot of people, what are you doing? So try to bring them into the study.
Yeah, you're an ambassador for the project and for birds. The final thing that's in your bag that we haven't talked about yet are is the packing list. So this is self-explanatory and should be pretty useful. At the end of the survey period, we would love to take your unused supplies back so that we can use them again for next year. So please keep that in mind as you're using it. That we'll reuse them. Okay, so then as far as paperwork goes, you'll notice that there is a waiver form that we've asked you to sign. This just basically covers absolute worst case scenario. There's very little chance that anything will happen that you need to worry about, but of course, we have to sign a waiver for everything. So if you could please sign a waiver and leave that with us today, that would be great.
The dates don't seem to be correct.
Whether for the first section.
Yeah. Yeah,
Get you an update.
we can get you an updated form.
Oh, I don't know.
Or you can scratch it out and
Yeah,
Oh.
just exit.
September 10th is the start date, and the end date is October 31st.
I don't think risk management. Knock us if it's not.
Good. The waiver refers to a volunteer fact sheet, so that's what the second page is. Today is the 7th. Yep. And then the third sheet leads us to our next section. Jackie, would you mind coming up here so that the recording picks up here?
I have a question, Brian.
Yeah.
Is there anywhere we need to record that we did not see any birds?
No.
Are you
So
just
what we're
assuming
recording.
there, You're assuming you saw nothing, if you hear nothing.
Yeah, thanks for reminding me. I will send out a weekly email to check in with you and see if you have any questions or ran into any issues, and also ask for your time spent that week. If you work with another person, please include that information so that we can accurately account for the effort on this project. But just watch for those emails. And then you can mention in there that you did go out but you didn't see anything. Yes,
So we
Mary?
don't even include the weather or anything on a day. It seems like that'd be interesting, how many days they can.
The iNaturalist app does ask
So
for
every
weather
survey
data.
you
Yep,
get.
and we'll show those videos that take you through the app here in just a minute when Jackie's wrapped up. Any other questions? Okay, great. Could you introduce yourself again?
Yep, so I'm Jackie Sander. I'm the Wildlife Rehabilitation Training Coordinator for the Dane County Humane Society's Wildlife Center. I love this project because I'm a bird nerd. I did my master's here at UW working with birds, and I've been working with birds for a very long time. So I've been with the Humane Society since 2010, and I'm one of the advanced license holders with a U.S. Fish and Wildlife license for working with bird species. So just to give you a background, so for those of you who aren't familiar with the Humane Society, our Wildlife Center program takes in 4,000 sick, injured, and orphaned wildlife every year, and that's just mostly from Dane County. A lot of it is from surrounding counties if there aren't other rehabilitators in our state, but a very large percentage of them are birds. And another huge percentage is during migration because all these birds are coming through hitting windows, or they're being struck by cars or vehicles. And usually the public just brings them in. So we're very appreciative for Audubon to have this as part of their protocol for this. And I have a question for you later about that, just to remind me. Collisions from people that aren't volunteers, if you want that data from a location on campus.
Okay.
So basically, so like she said, we're located off of kind of where the Beltline 1218 crosses Stoughton Road. We're right there. And I probably should make a really quick mention about that, the time frame. If you're that early morning shift, that 5 to 8, or 5 to 8:30, I did forget that we really aren't answering our phone calls until 8 a.m. or 9 a.m., depending on the time of year. So we may have to troubleshoot that with animal services, especially October 15th to October 31st. We won't have someone available to answer the phone until 9 a.m. So that might be something to talk about. But basically, so if you guys are finding an injured bird, and so she mentioned that there's either stunned birds or ones that are actually visibly injured. There's kind of a difference between the two. The reason we would have somebody bring us a bird that was injured would be if they have signs of blunt force trauma, if they have blood maybe anywhere that you can visibly see. Maybe there's blood coming from the beak, or there's a wound on the head, anything on the wings, or any sort of asymmetry in the wing position. You might not be sure, but usually if you look at a bird, their wings, their primaries should match up. And if you have one that's hiked up or one that's drooped lower than the other, if they're not exactly symmetrical, that's probably a bird with a shoulder girdle fracture. And that's probably the most common injury we see to birds that strike windows if they didn't actually die on impact. So if you see any of those signs, or just general lethargy, the bird just is not reacting when you approach, it doesn't want to fly away from you. Basically our rule is if you can pick up an adult bird in the wild on the ground and it doesn't fly away from you, there's probably something wrong. Now there has been some research showing that, well, maybe the bird is just stunned, maybe it didn't hit it with such a high impact that it is actually injured. And our rule of thumb is like if it can sit in a little paper bag or your cloth bag for an hour or 2 hours, and after that it could fly away, it may not have sustained such a major injury that it would need to come into rehabilitation. So just an example, I got to release a Tennessee warbler just on my way here because he hit a window yesterday and he was flying great this morning and I released him, so that was fabulous. So it can happen, it's not a huge deal, but we don't really know. We can't see things like tiny little skull fractures on these tiny warblers. So there is a possibility that even if it did fly away, you could find a deceased later in your study area, so maybe be aware of that. But the 5-gallon bucket idea is great. I like that because a bird should be able to fly up and out of something like a container for it to, if it had a fracture, it would only be able to take short little hops and steps, and it would not be able to do a full flight away from you. So that bucket or a garbage can or something like that, if you can test the bird to fly away in that respect, that will help a lot. You'll feel better, I think. If that bird can fly away like that, I'd say it's okay. If it can't do that, then you'd want to bring it in. And I'm not sure if on your equipment card, a net, like a butterfly net or anything like that, that's a great suggestion maybe if you have any at home or you want to purchase one. If you ever are trying to, approach up on a bird that's maybe hit a window and it's down on the ground in the bushes, sometimes it's hard to actually get your hands over that bird and get right up close to it. So we really like little butterfly nets where you can just kind of slowly approach the bird, very quietly, cautiously. You don't want to make too many sudden movements, and just kind of try to bop the little net over the top of their bodies or their heads so that you can collect them and put them in a bag. And you probably want to be a little bit careful with handling with the birds. We definitely suggest wearing the gloves, latex gloves, just because your oils on your fingers and your hands can kind of destroy bird feathers over time, so it's nice if you can use those. And also, when you're actually holding the bird, you don't want to squeeze them very tightly at all, because they breathe with their keel moving in and out, their big bone across the center of their body. So if you squeeze them too tightly, if you're holding onto them, you don't want to suffocate the bird. And I think we really like the cloth bags if it's going to be a long period of time that you're waiting with the bird. The paper bag is fine for temporarily, like an hour and maybe at most, but it's not as ventilated as the cloth bags are. So I would put them in the cloth bag if it's going to be a few hours till you can get them to us. So it'd be great if you find an injured bird and you are able to catch it and collect it. You've gotten all your data for these guys through iNaturalist. You can call us. If you can call us ahead even to tell us, hey, I'm with the Bird Collision Corps and I'm on my way with a bird. Or even if you want to, it'd be great just to give us a message if you called Animal Services to pick up a bird, because then we can record it accurately. If they show up with the bird, then we can add Collision Corps into our information in our database. So you could just say, hey, with Bird Collision Corps, I called Animal Services to come pick up this injured bird. Hopefully it makes its way to you today, but I just wanted to let you know you can give us your name and information. We can call you back just to confirm. But yeah, hopefully either you can bring it to us yourself or Animal Services can help bring the bird to us. Yeah, definitely fastest if you can do it yourself, that would be appreciated. But we'll just basically have you fill out a little form about where you found the animal, and that's all you really need to do. You're just kind of a transport person. And we'll ask you details if you know you saw it hit the window, which it'll be suspected that it probably hit the window. You can give us any details that you have, or if you know what species it is. Also really cool, we got one woodcock from your last group, right? And that was the spring. And it ended up being a successful release, so that was really nice. He made it through, and that was a really cool species. Also a lot bigger than most of the birds you're probably finding.
Yeah.
So that was a fun bag. Oh, and then you also, I think you guys probably have the printout for, we just have an informational PDF here about how to help with window collision victims. So it kind of steps through all the processes about what we would do or what we would give the public information about if they found a bird that struck their window at home. So it's definitely good to read through this, and if you have any questions, you're absolutely welcome to call us, or you can email me too. I don't know if you want to send that information out, but
Yep.
Is that pretty, anything else that?
Questions?
Any questions?
Awesome.
Nope.
Thanks, Jack. Okay, so I think next we'll go through the iNaturalist tutorial videos. Did anyone have a chance to take a look at those yet? Great, a couple, good. How many of you are using an iPhone? About a little over half, 2/3. Okay, great. So let's start with that video here.
Do you want the layout?
Yeah, let's take a look at it. Okay, real fast. Did everyone have a chance to create an account? Okay, good. We're all on board so far.
Do you want us to open ours?
If you would like to follow along, this goes a bit faster because I built in fast forwarding. So it might be kind of hard to keep up, but I just mostly want to show the process and then answer questions as they come up. and this is where you start filling in all of the specific data to this observation. So it'll be location, what side of the building, as much detail as you can provide about whether you saw the imprint on the glass, or how many feet to the right of this particular door. Any type of detail you can provide is extremely helpful. And this is also where you'll record weather data. That's a real Okay, so that's the iPhone. Are there any questions? No, sorry, you're gonna have to listen to the same music for the Android. There are a few differences in between them, so it's. I noticed on this one with the Android, if you don't type in like 3 words of the project name, it doesn't get you to the project name. Whereas on the iPhone, you can start typing UW-Madison, and it just, as soon as you get to like the 3rd letter or something, it pulls up search results. Android, you have to type in the project name almost entirely to get there. Just to be aware.
And what's the full project name again?
Bird collision, UW-Madison, I think.
And type it in that sequence.
Yes.
For the Android.
Yes. Yeah. I think I had it listed on here. Here, this is the name here. Bird collisions, UW-Madison. The bottom of that text there. And again, this is where you start filling in all the details. Are there any questions about using this? I know it'll take some time of actually playing in it in order to come up with questions maybe, but if there are any that you can think of off the top of your head, you can answer them now.
Are we gonna do this then today, or is that, no?
You are welcome to hang out and I can walk through it with you.
Okay.
Otherwise, you can also take it home and do it at your own pace and you can email questions.
The other thing I should say, the other thing is, it would be great if you could do all this on the iPhone or the Android phone, but you don't have to do it on your phone. You can also do it on your computer at home if that's easier for you to do that. So you can just go to inaturalist.org, and then there's a drop-down box that says search for project, and you can just put Bird Collision UW-Madison, and you can do all this on your computer at home if that's easier for you. It would be great if you could take a picture, and you could just take a picture with your phone, and then upload that picture from your phone through your computer if that's easier, and then just write, take a little notebook and write all the relevant information down in the notebook.
The big advantage of using your phone in the field is that it automatically takes exact coordinates of where you are, but if you have a good memory of where you were when you had this encounter, then that'll be just fine. You can pick a spot on the map.
The other thing your phone is going to be extremely valuable for in the fall is your camera, because you're going to be getting fall warblers, which can be a nightmare to identify, and they look a lot different than they did in the spring. So it'll be a good test of your birding skills, and if you're learning how to identify birds, it's going to be a great test of that as well. But take a picture of it, and that will be very helpful, and you can pass the picture around, and we can help you with identification.
Okay, so that's all that we have lined up for the training. We're gonna hang around. I'll hang around